Hey, welcome back to That 70s Card Show. I'm your host, John Keating, and I thank you for joining me as I take a look back at the cards and the culture of the very colorful 1970s. We'll revisit a more simple time in our hobby by taking a deep dive into the sets and the stats with a generous amount of dad facts sprinkled in. As Neil Young would say, That 70 Card Show is currently sponsored by nobody. If you have a comment or suggestion, I urge you to drop me a line at ThatSeventiesCardShow at gmail.com, ThatSeventiesCardShow on YouTube, or at 70scard on Twitter. This is episode 55, and it is Father's Day in the year 2022 of the Common Era. And Father's Day means a lot to the sports world in general, and I think baseball in particular. So I'm going to kind of highlight some father-son combinations, but we'll talk a little bit about fathers and sons before we get into the meat of the show, if that's okay. Fathers, sons, and fathers, daughters, obviously they share a very unique bond. No different than mothers and sons and mothers and daughters, but obviously fathers we kind of lean towards in these sporting endeavors, whether it's as fans or participants. Although Ken Griffey Jr. once said that, I think I'm going to paraphrase and butcher it, but, you know, the wonderful talent that his father naturally gave him, and you know, the reporter was trying to get him to expand on or expound on his father's influence growing up. And of course, Ken Griffey Jr. said, my dad was playing baseball all summer, so it was his mom that drug him around a little league and the sporting events, and was his biggest supporter and biggest critic. So shout out to the moms, of course. It's no different than my situation. My father was a pretty busy guy. I made my baseball debut in the spring of 1974. I was a bat boy for the Audubon Recreation Association A's. My father was the coach, and my two brothers were on the roster. I was the bat boy, and I believe I've told this story before, where there was a tornado warning, and not parents wiser than mine kept their kids at home, so I was called out to right field in the middle of the storm, all by myself, and that's where I made my debut. And it was, you know, my dad. It's kind of my last memory of my dad with the Little League setup, because my dad was a very busy man, working in town, and my mom, of course, drug me to all my games and was there for all those moments. Keep in mind, back then, folks, we were. I'm so old that I played with an offshoot of the Little League. It wasn't even Little League. It was some independent rabble-rousers, and we played in T-shirts and corduroys, so our uniforms were probably green tops then, with some sponsor's name on the front, and probably, most likely, if I know my mom, it was probably brown corduroys and black Chuck Taylors I was wearing at that time. So anyway, back to that. My dad, again, didn't see many of my Little League games, unfortunately. My dad worked hard. I previously told the story on the Mother's Day about my mom and I going to a lot of games together, but obviously that was because my dad worked hard and was able to procure those tickets via one of his employers. So my dad's influence was there. It just wasn't immediate and always present, but I do remember that 1979, getting that Yaz rookie card that I wanted more than anything in the world. My dad laying down a huge down payment of $25, which covered the entire cost, and you know, and I would pay him back $1 a month for the rest of my life. So that never happened. I still have the card, SGC3, the most valuable card in the world. My dad took me to see the Red Sox at Yankee Stadium in 1981. I got to see Yaz and Reggie. We sat about, I believe we were closer to the moon than we were to the home plate, but I remember that vividly. And more importantly, 14 years old, 1982, was kind of like my last throes of youth. My mom and my dad and I went on a road trip, just the three of us, and we went up to Boston, and we got to see the Red Sox. I stood about 15 feet from Yaz. I was at the end of the dugout. He was in the dugout. And even back then, I didn't want to ask for autographs, but I just remember being within 15 feet of Yaz was enough for me, and I just sat there, or just stood there and watched him as he watched batting and or fielding practice happen, and that was probably the highlight of my, probably one of the highlights of my youth as far as baseball. I'm happy, and for those who continue to have great relationships with their fathers. My father passed away when I was 16, so what I miss most, I guess, would be never having been a friend of his. I knew him as a father. He was a great father, but it would have been great to know him as a friend. And, he was old school all the way. Parents were from Ireland. My dad, I didn't see my dad wear shoes until he was probably, 48 years old. He wore sneakers. I'm sorry, I didn't see my dad wear sneakers until he was 48. He wore shoes his entire life. Born in the Depression, collecting. Was out of reach due to both his economic situation. He grew up pretty poor. Plus, his peak collecting years would have been during World War II, I imagine. So, didn't have much in common with that stuff, collecting. But he did give me that Yaz card, and it's kind of like my last piece of him. So it's kind of fun to look up at that card every now and then and think of my father. My sons, I'm a father myself. Thankfully, I have two two-legged sons, and I have one four-legged son. And I love them dearly. They're both taller than me now. One is out of college. One is halfway through college. And they're just good kids. And knowing that they'll be okay without me in their future makes me happy. Hopefully, I'll be around a very long time to harass them, but it's neat. I grew up. My oldest son was a heck of a baseball player, a lefty, threw right but batted left, fast as a deer, and played a couple of years of baseball. Bored him to tears, and he moved on to lacrosse, which I could understand with the energy that he had. So, he would have been a great baseball player, and but he pursued what he wanted to pursue. His passion was lacrosse for many years until he blew a knee out. So. It was fun watching him. My other son was a righty all the way, a power hitter all the way, and a lot more calculating than his older brother. But I had a good time watching them grow up, play sports. I got to coach both my sons in baseball, and good times. Good times having 6-year-olds tell you or insinuate that you really don't know what you're doing, Dad. You don't know much about baseball. So that's part of the education of parenthood. You get schooled up by your kids. So I learned more from my kids than I'll ever teach them, for sure. And of course, I have my four-legged son, Jetty Spaghetti, all black Yeti, who is usually by my side or behind me, probably sleeping most of the time. But within earshot, he's not around now because mom's here or upstairs, but he definitely enjoys listening to me create my podcasts and sort my cards and all that stuff. So thank you to Jet, thank you to Jackson, and thank you to Sean for letting me be your father. Enough of that sappy stuff, huh? So this is the weekend before Hobbypalooza. Hobbypalooza will be June 24th, 25th, and 26th over on Bench Clear Media's YouTube channel. It's going to be awesome. I absolutely loved last year's Hobbypalooza as an attendee. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Loved all the content. I learned a lot because I haven't been around much in this content creation thing, but I got to see a lot of the legends do their thing, and it was fun. So with that said, I was honored to be asked to participate this year, and I'll be on 25th, next Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern. How ironic is that? The 70s on 7 at 7. So I have a couple guests that I went 3 for 3. I asked 3 collectors that are kind of not the same, do things differently, and whether it's collecting or their fandom, and their personalities that some are well known within the hobby but don't have shows. Some are not known in the hobby, but either way, I'm thrilled that all three said yes. I can't wait for next Saturday because I have a bunch of questions for them, and it was a calculated move on my part because I wanted to find more about these particular people for particular reasons. So it'll be kind of like an interview. Hopefully we'll have some fun, and we'll learn a lot about each other, learn a lot about the hobby as well. So, episode 55, Fathers, Sons, Baseball Stuff. There are, as of today, 252 sets of father sons that have played in Major League Baseball. It may be a little bit more. There may be some asterisks there because there are obviously fathers that had two sons. So I don't count those, but we're going to kind of run through that. There's some Hall of Famers out there, fathers, that the fathers were pretty good enough to make it to the Hall of Fame, and the sons quite didn't live up to the genetic expectations. But going back, Jim O'Rourke was your first Hall of Famer. He's back from the yonder years, several centuries ago. Connie Mack, of course, his son Earl Mack played in 1910, but Connie Mack, Earl Mack, that's a little bit of nepotism there. Earl Mack may have even won a couple World Series for the A's doing nothing. Ed Walsh, who was essentially Sandy Koufax 100-something years ago. So if you look at Ed Walsh's and Sandy Koufax's career comparisons in Baseball Reference, it's pretty wild. They were kind of the same, 6 or 7 brilliant years and then into oblivion due to arm injuries, I'm sure. Eddie Collins, Hall of Famer, his son Eddie Collins Jr. Made his debut in 1939. I think Eddie Collins Jr. had probably a 90-plus less batting average, 90.90 less than his old man. George Sisler had two kids that played in there, Dick Sisler and Dave Sisler. George Sisler also, oddly enough, pitched a little too. So Joe Wood as well. Joe Wood is supposed to be a Hall of Famer in some people's minds. So his son Joe Wood Jr. also played in baseball. Let's see. Let's go down the list here. Earl Averill, who I think is probably not a Hall of Famer. His son Earl Averill also played. Freddie Lindstrom, another guy who I think does not belong in the Hall of Fame. His son Chuck Lindstrom played, but Chuck Lindstrom is one of the two guys here. The other guy is, let's see if I can find him. Let me look on my thing here. Chuck Lindstrom and Earl Brucker, both second generations, Earl Brucker Jr., both are in the one-hit wonder club where they went 1-for-1, 1,000 or 1.000 batting average for their career, and probably did it the way most of us should do, and that's it, never go to bat again. So Fred Lindstrom and Chuck Lindstrom. Fred does not belong in the Hall of Fame, according to me. Chuck Lindstrom has a 1.000 career batting average. Couple other ones we'll talk about here in a minute for obvious reasons. But Yogi Berra's son, Dale Berra, made his debut in 1977. Dale Berra, of course, won a World Series ring with the 79 Pirates. Chuck Tanner and Bruce Tanner, Bobby Bonds and Barry Bonds, of course. And so let's see here. Yogi Berra. And then we have a million of them that come on in kind of the junk wax era, right? The Alous, the McRaes, all those guys, Amaros, and such. So Tony Perez's son, another Hall of Famer, Tony Perez. Eduardo Perez made his debut in 1993. Let's see here. And then I believe Tony Gwynn, of course, his son Tony Gwynn made his debut in 2006. And we're getting to the end here because Ivan Rodriguez, Vladimir Guerrero, and Craig Biggio, all Hall of Famers, and their sons are, I guess they're all still in baseball right now. Interestingly enough, of all these father-son combinations, It took until I think the early 2000s before we had a son make it into the Hall of Fame, and that would have been the first one would have been Roberto Alomar making it into the Hall of Fame, and then Ken Griffey Jr. They both debuted. Alomar debuted in April of '88, and Jr. debuted in April of '89. So they're the only two sons that have made it into the Hall of Fame, and no father-son combinations in the Baseball Hall of Fame. But, I think we all agree that maybe Vlad, the younger, has a pretty good shot if he continues his career trajectory. It's way too early to tell. It's about 12 years too early to tell if you ask me, but that may be somewhere down the road. Your kids may say Vlad Guerrero Jr., Hall of Famer, and that would be pretty cool to have a father-son Hall of Fame combination in baseball. So a couple fun dad facts that I got off of Baseball Almanac. All the fathers and sons who have pitched, Ed Walsh has the lowest career earned run average at 1.82, and his son Ed Walsh Jr. happens to have the highest career earned run average at 5.57. Did you know that Mel Stottlemyre and his sons Todd and Mel Jr. have had the most strikeouts of any father and son combination? And do you know the first black father and son combination? It was the Hairston family, Sammy, Jerry, and Jerry Jr., who recently joined another family combo when their grandson broke in with the Baltimore Orioles during the 1998 season. That was about 24 years ago, so it wasn't recent, Baseball Almanac. But there are some people coming up here that we're going to talk about that may just make more baseball history, which would be pretty sick, as the children say these days. So, of course, one of my favorite things in the world is 1970s baseball and 1970s baseball cards and the subsets from the 1970s. So, you guessed it right. I'm going to talk about the 1976 subset of father and son big leaguers. And first up is the Bell family. Gus Bell, Buddy Bell. They were card number 66, both depicted in one's in a Reds uniform and one's in a Indians uniform. But we're going to read card number 66, and I've stated under oath that I believe that these cards were ghostwritten, and I'll let you guys decide on your own, but I'm telling you they're ghostwritten. So this is what Gus Bell says about my dad on card number 66. In 1969 at Sarasota, Florida, I became so depressed that I considered quitting baseball. I called Dad in Cincinnati and told him of my feelings. Dad said to stay there. He'd be down promptly. It took him 19 hours, and there he was! Dad calmed me, made me feel like new, and I resumed my career. Thus, whatever success I may achieve in baseball, I owe to Dad. So that's a very heartfelt story, and I apologize if I'm coming down a little too hard on perhaps Buddy Bell's emotional diarrhea, but I still think that it was written by some guy or gal in an office in Brooklyn, New York. Gus Bell played for 15 years in baseball, 9 years with Cincinnati, 3 years with Pittsburgh, 3 years with the Milwaukee Braves, and 1 year with the infamous early 60s New York Mets. He was a four-time All-Star, career batting average of .281, and he racked up 1,823 hits. He made the All-Star team again 4 times, so that's pretty impressive for him, and happy to hear it. So let's talk about Buddy Bell. Buddy Bell, we know Buddy Bell, or at least I know Buddy Bell, because he kind of played in the era that I had my biggest spurt of fandom. Buddy Bell played for 18 years. And he was a 5-time All-Star, 6-time Gold Glove, and a Silver Slugger Award winner. He played 8 years in Texas, 7 years in Cleveland, 4 years in Cincinnati, and 1 year in Houston. Top 30 MVP vote getter, I think 5 times. Finished with 2,500 hits, which is pretty impressive. 279 career batting average. Over 1,000 runs and RBIs. And more of a walker than a striker outerer. And pretty solid player. People would say that Buddy Bell at third base was a pretty solid guy. Unfortunately, no rings for him. In fact, man, let me take a look here. This might be horrible news. I'm trying to find if he even played in the postseason, and I don't think he played in the postseason at all, which is thoroughly deflating as for a guy who played 18 years in baseball. So that's Buddy Bell. Of course, there's more, right? Buddy Bell had 2 sons that played in baseball, David Bell and Mike Bell. So David Bell, another 12 years in the bigs, solid. Another solid third baseman, I think. He played all over the place. He played for Philadelphia, Seattle, St. Louis, Cleveland, San Francisco, and Milwaukee. And he, too, did not win a championship in his career, unfortunately. He did get to play in the postseason for a couple of years in a row there, I think, with Seattle, and San Francisco. And his brother, Mike, played 1 year in baseball and not a championship either. So the kicker here is, I believe, Mike Bell's son has been drafted or will be drafted or something similar to that. So we may have a 4th generation family in baseball, the Bells, which is I think it's awesome. I think that's wonderful if we see that, and hopefully that'll come to fruition soon, I guess, right? It's a long road to the bigs, but hopefully good luck to Mike Bell's son. So moving on to card number 67, the Boones, Ray Boone and Bob Boone. Again, card 67, we're going to read about Ray Boone in the words of Bob Boone. Dad was promoted to the big leagues when I was an infant. Thus, I grew up around baseball. I began playing baseball as early as I can recall, and Dad was always there to lend a helping hand and give me some pointers. Stop. I think that's BS, because Dad was probably playing somewhere else in some other town. He probably wasn't giving you pointers there, Bob. Dad played the infield, and as a result, I started my career at third base. I can thank Dad for the opportunity of growing up in a baseball atmosphere. Again, I call BS on that, but we'll let the Boones have their moment. I'll talk a little bit about the Boones here. Of course, they have quite the lineage as well, but the thing about the Boones is Ray Boone broke in 48 with Cleveland, and what did Cleveland do in 48? They won the World Series, and Ray Boone had 1 at bat in that World Series. He struck out. I believe it was against the Milwaukee Braves. That would not have been the Milwaukee Braves. That would have been the something Braves. Boston Braves, right? So I think that's what happened. So anyway, maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. So anyway, long career, 13 years in the bigs, 1,200 hits, 275 batter. Played for Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee Braves, the Chicago White Sox, Boston, probably Red Sox, and the Kansas City Athletics. Let me check this again. Now, that would have been the Boston Red Sox in 1960. He ended his career. Kind of walked off hand in hand with Ted Williams on that final day. I guess they made a pact saying, let's do this together. So Ray Boone, in the shadow of history there, 1960. Ray Boone is the father of Bob Boone, obviously. Let me check something out here again. I'm just convinced he played in that. Yeah, postseason, Boston Braves. 1 game, 1 plate appearance, 1 at bat, 1 strikeout for Ray Boone. In the 1948 World Series, that was good enough, though, to get him a ring back then. Bob Boone, Bob Boone was my catcher in Philadelphia. Okay, Bob Boone broke in 1972, and he played through the 1981 season with the Phillies. The thing about Bob Boone was Bob Boone rarely caught Steve Carlton during the highlight of the heights of Carlton's career. That was a job that went to Tim McCarver, and it was very interesting. Bob Boone was a solid defensive catcher. Wasn't much of a hitter, but his defense was great. And but Tim McCarver would go out there and catch for the very mercurial Steve Carlton every X amount of days. Boone played from September 10th, 1972 as a fall call-up, and his last game was September 27th, 1990. He was 42 years old at that point. 1,838 hits, career .254 hitter, 1980 world champion, 4-time All-Star, 7-time Gold Glove. He made the greatest assist in World Series history when, as I've said repeatedly, he gently placed the ball into Pete Rose's glove in front of the Phillies dugout for the second to last out. Game 6 of the 1980 World Series. So Bob Boone, he's a giver. He's a sharer, and that's probably what'll go down in his non-Hall of Fame plaque someday. Giver, sharer, and kind of the meat of the Boone sandwich between his father Ray and, of course, his two sons Aaron and Brett. Now, this is where the parades stop for the Boone family, because Ray, of course, 48, and Bob, 1980. But Aaron Boone played 12 years and is not a world champion. He was a one-time All-Star, 7 years for Cincy, 2 years for Cleveburg, 1 year in the Washington Nationals, New York Yankees 1 year, the Houston Astros 1 year, and the Florida Marlins 1 year. 1,017 hits, barely made it over about the 1K mark there. .263 batting average. And I think you see a theme here, or feel a theme, that these Boones just couldn't hit the ball very well or very often. Let's go to Aaron Boone's brother. He's Brett Boone. And Brett Boone had a 14-year career. 3-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glover there at second base, 2-time Silver Slugger. So he kind of broke the cycle there by getting some Silver Sluggerage. He had 1,775 hits when he retired in 2005, over 1,000 RBIs, just under 1,000 runs scored. He was a .266 hitter, led the league in RBIs for Seattle in 2001 with 141 RBIs. He came in third in the MVP voting that year. So part of a great team back then. As we know, those Seattle Mariners were really good team for a while there until everybody went sideways and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's the Boone family. I don't know. There's nothing on Baseball Reference about Pat Boone or Debbie Boone, but there are a lot of Boones out there. Daniel Boone, and they all seem to have done pretty well for themselves. Probably out-hit their coverage, but they, deserving mentions to all of them. Moving on to the Coleman family, the originally named Joe Coleman and Joe Coleman Jr. These guys are card number 68 in that wonderful 1976 Topps set. And I'm reading off the cards because I can't read off my screen. So, Joe Coleman about Joe Coleman Sr. Dad was a tremendous influence upon me in my younger years. He didn't push me, but was always there when I needed advice. We'd work out together frequently. He taught me how to grip a ball and advised me to throw it straight and not worry about curves until later. I'm extremely grateful to Dad for any success I may achieve in my baseball career. Signed, Joe Coleman Jr. Wow, what a tribute. Great job, Joe Coleman Jr. If you did that on your own, kudos to you. But let's talk about your old man. Your old man, Joe Coleman Sr., was a one-time All-Star. Made his debut in 1942. At the age of 19, he played one game, and guess what? He shut it down and went into the Navy for 3 full years. So we'll never quite know. We'll never quite know what Joel Coleman could have been had he not gone to the war. But he was part of that horrible 1942 Philadelphia A's teams, and I'm pretty sure that the A's didn't get any better when he came back from his service in 1946. Joe Coleman Sr. was a 52-76 career pitcher. with a 4.38 ERA. He held on there for 10 years, 8 years with the A's of Philadelphia, 2 years with the Baltimore Orioles, and 1 year in Detroit. So not a lot going on there with Joe. He made the All-Star team in 1948 with a 14-13 record. Top 20 MVP vote getter, though, in 1954 with a 13-17 record. So, don't know who was voting, but yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about Joe Coleman Jr. Joe Coleman Jr. was a 15-year pitcher in Major League Baseball. Had some success, 2-time 20-game winner. One-time All-Star, but he won 20 games in 71 for Detroit and 23 in 73 for Detroit. Had over 100 wins in the 70s and finished out in 79 with underwhelming end of the career, splitting the season between San Francisco and Pittsburgh. 6 years in Washington for the Washington Senators, 6 years in Detroit, 2 years in Oakland, 1 year in Pittsburgh, 1 year in San Francisco, 1 year with the Chicago Cubs, and 1 year in the Great White North of Toronto in part of 1978. Again, an All-Star in 72 when he went 19-14, and 23rd in the MVP voting in 1973. He had a son, Casey Coleman, who played baseball, and our boy Bo might know this, but 2010 to 2012 he played for Chicago. Pitcher, and he played 1 year in 2014 for the Kansas City Royals. Career record was 8-13. He don't know what Casey Coleman's doing, but third generation baseball player. So kudos to you, Casey Coleman, Joe Coleman Jr., and Joe Coleman Sr. All right. Card number 69. Let's talk about card number 69, and that is the Hegans, Jim Hegan and Mike Hegan. Let's hear what Mike Egan has to say about his father, Jim. Dad always urged me on to achieve my potential. Once when the Indians were in Boston, Dad had teammates Bob Lemon, Al Rosen, and Mickey Vernon come to our house for an afternoon. I played catch with all four and was given tips on improving my play. Dad has been a great influence to me both in baseball and in life, and I'll always be grateful to him for that. And that is signed and notarized by Mike Hegan. Let's talk a little bit about the Hegans. I have a feeling there were some beers exchanged in the backyard that day, too, when Mike Hegan played catch with Bob Lemon and the fellas. Jim Hegan, 5-time All-Star, another 1948 World Series participant and winner. Let's see here. 1948 in the World Series, he had 21 plate appearances, and he batted .211. He had a home run with 5 RBIs, and he was part of the 1954 pennant winners as well, hitting .154 in that World Series. So you couldn't count on the bat of Jim Hegan in the postseason, apparently. Jim Hegan broke in with the Cleveland Indians at the age of 20 in 1941. 42, he played most of a season, and then 43 through 45, he was gone to military service as well. He was a career .228 hitter, topping off at 1,087 hits, 92 home runs, and 525 career RBIs. He was, he was a 5-time All-Star, so he made some All-Star teams there at the catching position. So considering Yogi Berra was around then too, kind of surprises me. So maybe he was always backing up Yogi Berra on the All-Star game, because that was peak Yogi back then. Never really hit, I think 249 was his career high as far as full seasons played. Batted .319 in 16 games his rookie year, but not much going on there. Let's talk about Mike Hegan. Mike Hegan was a one-time All-Star, and he was a World Series winner with the amazing A's of 1972. And let's see, in 1972, he had one plate appearance, scored a run, and don't know the particulars about that. One at bat, 1 run scored, 0 hits. So perhaps he was a pinch runner, but he played in, I lied, that was the ACLS. ALCS, I should say. He played all six. He played 6 games against Cincinnati in '72 World Series. 5 plate appearances, 5 at bats, 1 hit, 200 batting average, 2 strikeouts. So he was probably a defensive replacement / pinch hitter during that period. Mike played first base and outfield for 12 years in the American League for the Milwaukee Brewers, the New York Yankees for 5 years, and Oakland for 3 years. So it's got Milwaukee for 7, New York for 5, Oakland for 3. So that means he split some time there, a couple seasons. 504 career hits, 242 batting average. So nothing there to write home about. I guess he was best known as an announcer. I don't know who he announced with, but I'm pretty sure it was probably Milwaukee or somebody like that. Let me let's see if I can find that out. Broadcaster for the Indians from 1989, and various other things. So most of you guys and gals probably knew him as a broadcaster for the Cleveland Indians back in the day. So Mike Egan, this one's for you, buddy. Mike passed away at the age of 71 in 2013. So been gone a long time, but I think they loved him over there in Cleveland. Next card, number 70. This is a weird one. This is the Roy Smalley Jr. talking about Roy Smalley Sr., but what I've come to find out, it's actually Roy Smalley III, and his father was Roy Smalley Jr., and somebody that didn't play baseball was Roy Smalley Sr. So this is Roy Smalley III talking about Roy Smalley Jr. I credit Dad with being instrumental in my development, both as a player and as a person. It was Dad who suggested I try my hand at switch hitting. I was particularly proud to have my dad in the stands as I was named to the All-Tourney team and All-American when USC won their 3rd straight national championship title during my senior year in college, 1972. Now that I can believe because by that point, Roy Smalley version 2 was retired and probably had plenty of time to watch Roy Smalley version 3. Let's bring up the Smalley family here. Roy Smalley V2 really didn't make much of a mark on baseball. He did play 11 years, 6 years for the Cubs, 4 years for the Phillies, and 1 year for the Milwaukee Braves. Career 601 hits, 305 RBIs. He was a .227 hitter. No All-Stars, no Gold Gloves, no Silver Sluggers, no postseason. So he's pretty much the invisible man. But he did marry Gene Mauch's sister when they were both minor leaguers somewhere up in somewhere, and I don't know which farm system they were in. So Gene Mauch, brother-in-law to Roy Smalley, and of course Roy Smalley and the Mrs. Smalley nee Mauch fathered Roy Smalley III or Jr., depending on which scorecard you're watching. So Roy Smalley V3 was a one-time All-Star. He did win the 1987 World Series with those wonderful Minnesota Twins. He bounced around a couple times. Started out with Texas, and then to Minnesota, then to New York, then back to the White Sox, and then back to Minnesota finally. 10 years with Minnesota, 3 years with the Yankees, 2 years with the Rangers, and 1 year with the Chicago White Sox. He was involved in a blockbuster trade, one of those famous Burt Blyleven trades, probably in '76, I would imagine. Blyleven going south, Smalley the third going north. So Roy had a decent career, 1,454 hits, batted .257. 694 RBIs and 745 runs scored. Again, he was an All-Star in '79. MVP, he placed 16th. He led the league that year in games played with 162 and plate appearances with 729. And in perfect symmetry, he had 80 bases on balls as well as 80 strikeouts. I like to see that. Batted .271 that year. So let's see. Roy Smalley in the postseason. 1987, did not play in the ALCS. He played 4 games, 4 plate appearances in the World Series, 2 at-bats, 1 hit, which was a double, so he batted .500 in that postseason, or in that '87 World Series. Good enough to earn him a ring. And, yeah, I don't know what old Roy's doing these days, but son of Roy Smalley Jr. and nephew of Gene Mauch. I'm going to talk about one other gang here, and it has nothing to do with 1976, but of course, I just hit my mic, sorry. Of course, if you were around in the 70s, you will be familiar with what I'm about to show you here, and that's Bump Wills, right? Bump Wills has two wonderful, nearly identical cards in the 1979 Topps set. Nearly identical except for the banner on the bottom. One clearly says Rangers, one clearly and brightly says Blue Jays. Otherwise, the cards are the same. Not sure what happened there, but it's probably one in my youth. It was the big error card to have because it was such an obvious error. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a something. It was clearly a error. So Bump Wills, of course, was the son of Maury Wills, and Maury Wills had quite a career for himself. Maury Wills was an MVP in 1962. He was a three-time World Series winner. He was All-Star Game MVP, two-time Gold Glove winner. And, of course, he loved to steal his bases. Broke the 100 steals a season mark in 1962 with 104 steals. 586 for his career, which is kind of south of what most of us would expect. But he was known as a wonderful, wonderful base stealer. 281 hitter throughout his career, often leading off, often leading the league in plate appearances and at bats and stolen bases, and of course caught stealing. Another interesting thing about him is in 1962, he played 165 games. Now, I'm sure that had something to do with the playoff back then. I'm going to take a look at that right now. I don't know why they would have played 165 games back then. So it didn't have anything to do with the playoff, or did it? Yeah, it did. It was a playoff. So there was a 3-game playoff postseason, and the Dodgers lost to the Giants 8-0. Then they beat the Giants 8-7, and then they lost again to the Giants 6-4. Of course, the Giants were in fuego back then. They were straight up killers with McCovey and Mays and Cepeda and all those other guys. So anyway, that's why he played 165 regular season games in 1962. Of course, Maury Wills would play 14 years, 12 years with the Dodgers, 2 years with the Pittsburghs, and 1 year in Montreal, or 1.5 year in Montreal before going back to the Dodgers. 134 hits, 281, not bad. And again, 3-time World Series champion. Now his son Bump, man, talk about pressure, right? So Bump Wills debuted in 77 and bowed out in 82. He played 6 years, 5 years for Texas, and of course 1 year with the Chicago Cubs, where back then that's where careers went to die. 266 career hitter, 807 hits, always a starter, and I think he played a fair amount of games every year. I'm sure there's a story on why he suddenly fell off the cliff and stopped playing at the age of 29 or 30, whatever, but that's probably a different read for a different show. So that's that. So that's fathers, sons in baseball, and particularly in the 70s. Baseball Almanac helped me out a lot with this. Of course, Baseball Reference and the Topps Chewing Gum Company, which provided the wonderful, wonderful subset of 1976. Again, one of the things I used to love about the yonder days of the 70s was seeing these old baseball cards, and the 76 subset with the father and son, had the old timers cards on the front. There are, I guess it's 4 of those were from 1954, huh? And anyway, and one from 1953. So pretty cool stuff. Great cards, all, and that's about it. Fathers, if you have your father with you, hug them tight. Tell them how much you love them, how much they mean to you. And if you don't have them with you, I'm sure they know wherever they are, they're looking down and saying, you still playing with baseball cards there, boy? and don't be embarrassed to say yes. So anyway, thanks again for joining me this week on my journey back in time. If you have a comment or suggestion, or perhaps a set from the 1970s you'd like to hear more about, please reach out to me at ThatSeventiesCardShow@gmail.com, ThatSeventiesCardShow on YouTube, or 70s Card on Twitter. As we fade out into the ether, we're being played off by Mango Safari, my nephew's band. And happy Father's Day to my two brothers as well. And that's about that. So remember, always enjoy your collecting. And more importantly, enjoy your collection. Have a great, wonderful, wonderful week. And we will see you next week for some Smash Mouth Hobbypalooza. Take care.